Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of this little series where I go over the Tier 1 planes of War Thunder. I've covered the Italians first, then I switched over to the Germans, and then the Americans. Which, I don't know why I'm showing off a Japanese plane to start off this video when I'm talking about the Americans, but screw you guys. I like this plane. It's in the American tech tree, so I'm having fun with it. It's not even Tier 1. So, there. I'll show you my PS4 exclusive. Exclusive. But anyway, today I'm going to be dressing the giant elephant in the room. And I mean, this is bigger than any elephant you've ever seen. The Republicans only wish they had an elephant this big. The Ruskies. Today I am covering the Russians. Cheeky breeky comrade. Anyway, so what do you expect, just as a general stance, from starting off with Russia? Holy crap, can these planes get any more dumb? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's start off, those are tanks, with the reserve planes. The I-15s. These things are little hellions with wings. Because of multiple reasons. Mainly this. Now, remember, War Thunder's stat card in terms of turn time is a rudder turn only. Only using this. If you flip your ailerons and actually do a horizontal turn, you will get a faster time than that. There's people have been born and then died in this amount of time. That's how fast this thing turns. And it's with almost every single one. This one's a... Oh, no, it's still 7.9. Third reserve, the... Yeah, it's exactly the same. So... Okay, they turn well. The big freaking deal. What, you know... What else is it? Well, they're guns. And boy, do they have guns. You get 4 of these little bastards. 4 7.62 PV1 machine guns. With 3,000 rounds. You will hardly ever need to reload in this thing. And if you do, it's either because you're killing everybody or you are just a terrible shot. Because these guns are very lethal at Tier 1. Looking at them, your default belt, it's pretty crap. You get a couple of ball rounds, which are nothing. You get a tracer bullet and then a couple of... Alright. Armor-piercing incendiary, armor-piercing incendiary, adjustment incendiary, armor-piercing incendiary. Fuck. Armor-piercing incendiary, incendiary, incendiary. Everything's freaking incendiaries. So, going back to my Italian video... Armor-piercing incendiaries aren't that great at Tier 1 because nothing has any armor. I mean, you do have one armor plate back here, which, by the way, the I-15s, the WR, the M22, the I-15R, or the R, I should say, there's really no big difference between them. They're basically all the same. They all have basically the same stats. They all have 4 terrorizing machine guns. And anyway, why these guns are so good is their rate of fire. I'm going to go out and do a test flight with this little guy here, the WR, and I'm just going to load up the tracer belt, just to show you how much lead these things spew out. It is obscene. And commence fire. Now that doesn't seem like much, but you have to remember, with the tracer belt, or the universal belt, that's like every 5th bullet. There's 4 more of those flying in between there. So, let's take off here and actually show off that maneuverability. See that? See this tower right here? I'm not doing a perfect turn here, but I'm not even leaving the freaking airfield. I don't even touch the trees when I turn this. And you think to yourself, like, alright, you know, it's a biplane, of course it's supposed to turn well, but these are the fastest turning biplanes in the game. Now, to my knowledge, they're not the fastest biplanes in terms of just raw speed, but at low tiers like this, like what these guys are sitting at, the maps you'll be facing, that vehicle being 2.5 miles out, that's about as far as the farthest enemy on the map. Most low-tier games that you're going to be in these things only take place in about maybe a 3 to 4 square mile radius. Because obviously people are going to fly where the enemy ground vehicles are, so they can mop up the targets, which, by the way, these are very good at ground targets, just because of the sheer amount of lead they put out. If I can aim. These things are very good at killing whatever the heck they fire at. The only thing that you're maybe going to have problems with are more heavily armored airplanes, like maybe some of the American bombers, but you just keep shooting. Your incendiary belt will eventually hit a fuel tank, and then a Catalina will frickin' explode. Oh, not restart. Let's go there. So, when talking about low-tier Russians, everybody thinks they're super overpowered. Do I think they're overpowered? No. Do I think they have a heavy advantage over the rest of the teams? Or not teams, but nations in the game? Yes. But anyway, now that you know that these things are overpowered little pieces of crap, let's take a look at them. So, first off, the I-15s, I'm just going to go with the I guess you could say the penultimate reserve vehicle, the I-15R, just because it also has that nice winter camouflage on it. So, your guns, you have 4 of them, which are all forward-facing right in the middle of the prop hub, or not the prop hub, but the engine. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like I said before, they all fire very fast, and their belts, even though they're mostly armor-piercing incendiary, because they just fire so fast, you're going to basically set ablaze to anything you're going to shoot. And at this low battle ranking, anything with a fuel tank is basically dead if it catches on fire. Moving on to the personal protection, you do have one armored plate behind the cockpit here, which will help the pilot survive attacks from behind. These actually are pretty rugged aircraft, these little I-15s. But all that doesn't matter. You could just outturn anything. If anything gets on your 6, just roll right and then turn, and then next thing you know, you're on their 6. But moving on to the internals, you see everything is cramped into this tiny area here. Which, the I-15s are not very large targets in the first place. But, basically, if you hit... The Achilles heel to the I-15s is the Achilles heel to most reserve aircraft, is that once they're set on fire themselves, there's hardly a chance that they're going to put out that fire, at least in my experience. They also like to ram people. I don't know why, but people who fly like low-tier planes, they just find it, I don't know, you'll go head on with an enemy plane, and instead of actually trying to turn away to be able to, you know, continue flying, no, I'm just going to play the biggest game of chicken with 2 aircraft, and I'm just going to smack you midair. So that's something you need to watch out for. Anybody that goes head on with you, assume they're going to try to ram you. So let's get over to the more, in my opinion, the even more overpowered pieces of crap, the I-16s. And first off, one thing I failed to mention, just look how many you get. There's 4 there, and there's another 5 here. The I-15 Biz, I know I was going to talk about the I-16s, but just finishing up the other I-15s here. Basically, they do get, I guess you could say, a little bit more protection. Now there's a little bit more... less engine exposed, but this appears to just be thin sheet metal, so you can shoot right through an enemy. Also, their turn time isn't as great because they are heavier, but because they have a decently powerful engine, and they basically weigh nothing, all the I-15s, you could practically pick them up. You know, you get 3 people together, 1 to pick up the tail and 2 to pick up the wings. I'm pretty sure you could just walk away with this aircraft. But because they have that high power to weight ratio, any maneuver they're going to do, it's very hard to stall out an I-15. And same with the penultimate one. Actually, these ones are a bit different. The I-153M62. Basically, the reason why this one is so unique is because it has retractable landing gear. So it's actually a wee bit faster in terms of the plane's actual flight performance. Also, you don't have this really dumb scope sticking right down in the middle, but, you know, same armor plate, still everything's in the middle. This one just has retractable landing gear, so there's less drag, so it's a little bit faster, as fast as a biplane can go. But really, I wanted to talk more about these guys. These guys are what I love about the Russian low-tier tech tree. You start off with the I-16-5, which, by the way, if you get it, gets a really fancy Spanish Civil War skin. A lot of these skins that you'll unlock for the I-15, I-16s, they're basically stuff from Spanish Civil War. You even get some stuff that's like the Flying Circus kind of look. That's what it'll look like stock as soon as it loads in here. Yeah, you'll get stuff like that. You know, Flying Circus looking stuff. But I prefer the Spanish Civil War stuff, so that's the one I stick with. The I-15, the I-16 Type 5 actually gets kind of a downgrade in terms of its armament. It only gets 2 of these little lead spewers here, but you'd be surprised what you'd be capable with even 2 of these things. Once again, still very maneuverable, but again, not as maneuverable as the biplane. But most other monoplanes, especially your Americans, and even some, the best way I'm going to say is that you are going, with the I-16s, you are going to be the most maneuverable monoplane besides the Japanese. That's the Japanese ace in the hole, but we'll talk about them at a later date. But anyway, moving on from there. Also, just really quick here, the one thing that the I-15s and the I-16s both have that are very nice about them is the ability to carry ordnance. They usually have a difference between bombs and rockets. This one just happens to carry rockets. So you don't even really need to use your guns to take down bombers. You could just lob rockets at them. But moving on to the I-16 Type 10, once again, a very beautiful Spanish Civil War skin. You get those 4 lovely Chicas machine guns back. You get your 2 in the wings and then 2 in the prop hub here. Once again, just like the I-15s, the armor plating is just behind the pilot here, and then everything's stuck in the middle right here, so these planes are fairly durable if you hit them in the wings and the tail and whatnot, but if you hit them around the engine area, he's gone. His engine's going to die, and he's either just going to crash into the ground or he's going to get set on fire and just blow up from his fuel tank. The I-16 Type 18, really nothing too different. You do get a little bit of a speed boost from a more powerful engine. You do get the armor plating again. It's exact same loadout, exact same armament. You get your 2 machine guns there and 2 machine guns there. This is just a later, getting closer to the, or I should say, the outbreak of Operation Barbossa. Am I saying that right? No, Barbossa is the pirate. Barbarossa, that's what I'm saying. I got it confused with the guy from Pirates of the Caribbean for a second. But so you're a little bit faster just because of a more powerful engine here. This one's almost, over 1,000 horsepower taking off. So, the basic difference is that you're getting engine upgrades, but they're not super noticeable in game. The same with the penultimate I-16, the Type 24. You will notice it between like the I-16 Type 5 and the 24, but everything else in between I would say isn't really that different. Again, just same armor plating behind the cockpit, and then everything's same on the internal loadout. There's just small, minor adjustments in between different I-16s, so there's not super noticeable in-game, but I guess it's enough for them to verify having this many of them. Which, by the way, there's more of these things. And there's more of these. But they get much more stupid. And once I get to them in my Tier 2 and I think they're just Tier 2, but my Tier 2 reviews, you'll see why these things get really dumb once you start putting cannons on them. Speaking of cannons, let's say you want to get out of biplanes and you go over here. There's one little lonely plane sitting here, the Yak-1, which, by the way, jumps you from reserve aircraft to 2.3. So you will be facing anywhere between 3.3 to 4.3 error ranking aircraft, so be very careful when you do that. Play at your own risk. I would suggest getting at least a couple of these here, and then maybe some 2.0s down here, so where you can actually have, basically get out of biplanes before you consider having these in an arcade lineup. If you're playing more realistic, then just get whatever you want. You only get one plane out there in anyway. So the Yak-1. It's your first proper fighter for the Russians. In terms of its flight performance, it's pretty decently quick, pretty good turn time. I wouldn't say you're on par with a Spitfire. In terms of gameplay, you're on par with the British Spitfire in terms of maneuverability. You'll be able to outturn early 109s for the Russians, and then P-40s, stuff like that for the Americans, because you're going to be mostly facing Tier 2 and some Tier 3 rank aircraft with that 2.3 battle ranking. Occasionally, you might get thrown into the game with a couple of biplanes here and there, but that's just to be determined based off of what's in your lineup and your overall battle ranking and so on and so forth. But anyway, moving on to actually what the Yak 1 provides in terms of a fighter is, in terms of personal protection, you again still have this just one armor plate. It's still a pretty early war fighter, so armor's going to be pretty redundant here. Basically, anything that's going to get shots on you is going to hit you pretty hard. And then, just like the most of the planes here, is that they're going to have, like the Russian monoplanes that are, I guess you could say, later, like this design, you're going to have fuel tanks here, kind of spread out almost 2/3 down through your wing, so you really don't want to get shot at in this thing most of the time. That's one thing you got to get used to, is the change of not only your battle ranking and what's going to be shooting at you, but you're going to lose a lot of that durability with those fuel tanks in the wings. And having a fairly powerful engine, you're going to be able to pull off some fairly decent maneuvers in this thing. I wouldn't suggest doing a lot of them, but this plane really is kind of a jack of all trades. You can boom and zoom, you can turn. It's nothing really super bad about it. Moving on to the armament, you get two of those lovely bullet hoses, but then you also get this bad boy right here in the nose of the plane. That is a 20mm cannon at rank 1. Now, with the HE-112s, it's like, alright, well, you know, there's cannons in the wings, and there's two of them, and so, like, what makes that so powerful? You know, what's the big difference? I get cannons as the Germans at tier 1, why would I care about Russian cannons? Well, Russian cannons tend to be mounted in the nose. Now, if anybody listened to my video about the Italians with gun convergence and the advantages of having your armament in the nose versus in the wings, is that when you fire off at a distance, your guns need to eventually cross paths. But with nose-mounted armory, you don't need to worry about that. You could just aim and shoot. And having a cannon that you can just aim and shoot and not have to worry about convergence is very, very, very nice to have. You will rip up a lot of planes with that single 20mm cannon. And because it is a single 20mm cannon, your fire rate isn't going to be that slow, but it's a 20mm cannon. You are going to mess up whatever you hit. So then going on, we go down here, we get a couple of things called lags, L-A-G-G. There's the 3-8, which is the baby lag. And the main difference between the lag and the Yak is, well, you get rid of the two little bullet spewers, and you get one Russian 50 cal. Now, in terms of the modifications for the, I'm going to cover the cannon and the 12.7 because on this one, because with the Yak 1, it's basically the same guns that are on the I-15 and the I-16 in terms of the two little machine guns. So they're mostly just going to have armor-piercing incendiary kind of stuff. But with the 20mm, you have an armored targets belt, which is pretty good for ground attack, but why you would use these things for ground attack when they're so good against other fighters, I don't know. Universal, you're just filled with fragmentation, incendiaries, high explosive fragmentation. Go with the universal belt. The other belts may have a couple of things. Universal belts are where you want to go. At least for me, that's what I found out. And air targets, just because you get a bunch of incendiary. So you have incendiary and armor piercing and explosives over here, and then you have incendiary and armor piercing over here. So what's not to love? Well, the problem is that you do run out of ammo fairly quick for this Berezin UB machine gun here. You also, I guess I should say you need to be more careful with your rate of fire, because look at me being all clumsy, dropping the controller and unplugging my microphone. But anyway, you need to kind of watch your control with this, because with the Yak 1, you can kind of just spew bullets with the little machine guns, but, I mean, you're losing a gun, but you're also getting bigger guns, so just watch your trigger control a little bit with this guy, and the other lag, I think it's the lag 311. But, the other thing is that the engines on the lag, as you can see, what I was saying before with Russian fighters, they're going to have fuel tanks in the wings that are take up about half the wing, so be careful getting shot at in this thing. But the engine isn't really that powerful. And this is something you're going to find out with the lags. The lags are actually pretty decent at boom and zooming, because it is a pretty heavy aircraft, so they do pick up a lot of speed in a dive. So this is a plane I would highly suggest booming and zooming in, just because you're going to bleed a lot of speed in your turns. So just stay fast and, just climb up if you miss, and then just dive again. But since at Battle Ranking 2.3, everybody's basically flying biplanes or biplane tactics in monoplanes, and everybody just turns anyway, you should be able to be faster than most people that are just turning on you all day. With the lags especially, I would say avoid turning engagements if all possible. You can for like one turn before your speed starts to bleed fairly significantly, which it is a very speedy plane once it gets up to diving and whatnot. And with the lag 311, it's kinda sorta the same thing. There's just a few modifications difference that I'm not 100% sure what they actually are, but it warrants having its own plane in the game. I don't know, I think it might be an exhaust difference, I'm not too sure. But basically the same thing with the lag 3.8 you apply to the lag 3.11. Then we move on to these four lovely ladies. Start off here at 1.7 with the BB-1. This is your ground attack line. Oh yeah, isn't that thing a beauty? Start off with, this thing's a flying freaking tank! And you'll find a lot with the Russian line is that they are flying tanks, the ground attackers. You also have a very nice choice of bomb loadouts. You get 4 50s, which I don't know why you would pick that one unless you're stock, 4 100s, or 12 50s, or what I usually go with is the 6 100s, or if you're going bunker busting, you have the 2 250s. Now, the one thing that I feel like a lot of people forget about the BB-1s and the other planes in this line here, the Su-2 M5, the Su-2 whatever, and then the Su-2 M82, is that they have the exact same forward-facing armament as the I-15s and the I-16s. 4 of these little lead hoses that just vomit bullets. And they get like the exact same kind of belts too. Except with this, you also get a guy that gets one in the back. Now normally I don't really like attackers' turrets, but this guy here, because he has that rate of fire, and you are mostly going to have biplanes chasing you at a 1.7 battle ranking, this guy messes up biplanes pretty badly, so be very careful shooting at these guys. And like I said, these things are flying tanks. Unless you are very accurate with your shots, these things do not want to go down. Despite the fact they have absolutely no armor, and they have massive fuel tanks in the wings. I don't know what it is. Maybe people are just shooting at the fuselage, hoping to get kills there, but I don't know. For some reason or another, I feel like there's hidden armor plates in here that just aren't there, because it feels like these things just soak up damage for days. Which I personally love in a ground attacker. You could technically use these as heavy fighters too, but, you know, like I said with the American, I think it's the, gosh, I'm trying to remember what it is. Basically, in a nutshell, it's very comparable to the SBU-2, or the SB2U 3 here, with the 450 cals. It's very similar. The BB1 and the whatnot. So the SU2 is basically the same thing. There's a bit of an engine difference, so I guess that changes. It's not as big of a wide open radial. It's basically the exact same plane. You get the same bomb loadout, same defensive armament, same... Oh, I lied. This thing just has a crap ton of armor behind it. So between the BB-1 and the SU-2, this thing actually has a bunch of armor. I still think the BB-1 has this armor, and it's just not showing up, but pilot gets armor, and then the gunner gets just a crap ton of armor. You get a plate here, 2 plates here. Oh, this is just lovely. But like I said, you also have these things in the wings, so just aim for the wings. Do not shoot here. Do not shoot here. Ivan here will mess you up. Ivan is a very, very angry man at people that shoot at his low-tier Russian ground attack aircraft. So the only one I don't like out of this line is the SU-2 TSS. And that's because instead of having those lovely bullet hoses in the wings, you only get 2 of them. Which, I guess, can do the job. You also get like a different kind of turret back here. It's not that little ball turret that Ivan sits in. It's more of like a traditional turret that doesn't have that great of a firing arc. This is the red-headed stepchild of the bunch, is what I'm trying to say. You also lose out on all that armor, and you still have massive fuel tanks in the wings. So, this one's not that great. But then moving up to 2.0, you get the best one ever. The SU-2 M82. Now, the best thing about this is that you get all that lovely bomb ordnance, like the last 3. You get all that lovely armor that's out there. You also get Ivan, and you introduce yourself to Boris. Boris controls his own little machine gun down here. It's the exact same ones that face forward, and it's the exact same ones that are up top here. But now you can't approach this plane from the bottom either, because this guy is pointing at you. Basically, in a nutshell, it's like the other the ground attackers, but this one just happens to have a bottom gunner back there. Which, he actually has his own armor plating now. I always wondered why this plate was right here. I mean, you figure put it right here. There's a big gap right here in the middle, but now it makes sense. Boris wants a plate too. And in communist Russia, everybody gets an armor plate. Except for the people that don't. So, moving on to a very confusing aircraft. The Yak-2. The Yak-2, this behemoth, is technically supposed to be a ground attacker. It does come with some bombs. It does have a little bomb bay right here. But this thing, you don't want the bombs, because you have 2 20mm cannons and 2 bullet hoses in the 7.62 Shikosh machine guns. This thing is the best heavy fighter for the Russians. This thing is absolutely deadly. It gets an attacker's spawn point. You just go after Ju-87s and they have no idea what hit them, because these guns that are supposed to be used for ground attacking, you just murder other planes with. But this plane does have a few glaring weaknesses. This isn't one of them, however. It's like one of the best turning planes for a heavy fighter in the game. Which, by the way, the BB-1s and whatnot before, I know I kind of skip around a little bit here, but these are ground attackers. Attack the ground. Don't go into turn fights with them. If you can shoot at other planes, you know, obviously shoot them, but your main thing is ground attack. You can play them as sort of heavy fighters, but ground attack. This thing, don't ground attack, just be a fighter. But anyway, on to those blaring weaknesses I was talking about. It has this tiny little piece of armor right here, which doesn't even guard the pilot's head. You know, because... God, I need to think of a third Russian name. Dmitri over here didn't need his head to fly. And also, I don't know if you noticed by looking at the cockpit, that's a lot of glass. That's a lot of glass in the front there. There is nothing protecting you. Because your engines are here, usually in head-on attacks, unless the guy shooting at you gets lucky and he just hits the cockpit instead of the engines will take the damage for you. But because they're out there, don't go head-on in this thing. Do not. Whoever is shooting you is going to shoot right here, and poor Dmitri is going to meet an early grave. The other downside to the Yak is fuel tanks. Fuel tanks for days. You get fuel tank. Oh, those are liquid cooling systems, but I'm pretty sure those will catch on fire too. Fuel tank, 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 fuel tanks everywhere. Which is great for flying long distances, not great when you're getting shot at and everybody's firing incendiary rounds. So play this thing as a fighter and don't get shot at. I suggest doing boom and zoom tactics in it because you are a heavy fighter. Well, I guess you're an attacker, but attackers can be heavy too. So I wouldn't suggest sticking around for fighters at all, because anything that gets shots in you is going to kill you. This is probably the biggest glass cannon in terms of Tier 1 Russia. So, moving on to the Russian bombers. The first one you get is this line of SB-2Ms. Now, you get a lot of them. You get like 4 of them here. I just so happen to having to unlock this one here just because I'm not that much of a bomber pilot, but it's not that different between these ones here from what I've done my homework with. So the SB-2M100 at battle ranking 1.7. And the first thing you'll notice is that it's actually pretty skinny for a bomber. Now, it does get better. You do get 2 250s and a 500, but you start off with this little... I guess you could say this is the best bomb loadout because you get 600 kilograms versus everything else here. But this one's just the baby bomber. The engines aren't that great. What really makes these planes amazing is the turrets on them. You got Ivan and Boris back here, you know, just with those lead bullet hoses again. And you got Dmitri up here with his armor plating back here, so it's going to be hard to pilot snipe. Not to mention, you got these guys shooting at you, so good luck with that. But really, it just comes down to Vlad here. I'm running out of Russian names. I hope nobody else has more than four people in a plane in this video. I was not prepared for Russian names. But Vlad here has a dual-mounted 7.62 Shikosh machine gun. You can almost dogfight in this thing and just let Vlad here have all the fun he wants. Because these are actually very maneuverable for bombers. And that's something that's really annoying about these things, is that they are actually very, very maneuverable, and that's where they get most of their, I guess you could say, your, you know what, I'm going to go with the Spanish Republican skin there. I'm going to go with the pretty skin. But in terms of survivability, like I said, only the pilot gets any armor. And you do have some fuel tanks here, but they're pretty spread out against a very large wing. And then everybody's sort of crammed into this little stick here in the middle, so it can take a few hits, but it only takes a few lucky hits for you to catch on fire and burn out of the sky. And you move on to the SB2M103, which changes up things a little bit by having more powerful engines here, so you have 3 props instead of 2 props. In terms of armor plating, the same, and everybody's there in terms of gunners. Unfortunately for Ivan here, his head is still sticking out of the aircraft. On the early SB2Ms here, his head is still very much, he is still very much out in the open. And I'm pretty sure it gets the same bomb loadout. Actually, no, it actually gets it actually gets really decent bomb loadouts, so this plane actually might be worth doing some flying in, because you start off, you get your, that's where the first one cuts off, and then you get 2 250s and 2 500s, 3 500s, you know, just 4 250s. Yeah, there's you have a very diverse bomb loadout. Then the SB2M103U. Like I said, I have never flown out this plane myself, but from what I have seen, it's not that much different. Ivan now has his own little dedicated turret here, so he can actually turn a decent degree here. Everybody else is still where they'd normally be at. Got a guy here and guy here. But everybody flies out bombers for the actual bomb loadout, which is the same bomb loadout as before. I guess just the addition of this turret right here, the actual proper turret, made it its own variation. So, moving on from there. The one thing you have to be careful, though, with the SB2M105 is that you do jump from 2.7 to 3.3 battle ranking, which is one of the most highest ranking tier 1 bombers, or just planes in general, in the game. And there's a reason why. I actually spaded this thing out, and I've flown this thing out significantly. It's because this thing, which, you know, he gets his own turret there again. This thing is fast. Now, it says 275 there on the stat card, but most SB2Ms with that maneuverability, you can dive and weave and everything in between. This thing is fast. Once again, just the same bomb loadout as before. Really, the reason why it's at 3.3 is because it is a very quick bomber. You can get on target and drop your bombs fairly quickly and get out of there. I believe in, I don't know, maybe it's the next bomber, but this bomber here, you know, same armor plating, same fuel tank situation, everything here. It's just, this thing's quick, and it gets on target pretty quick. Plus, with that pretty decent bomb load out there, you can see how massive the bombs are compared to the fuselage. Yeah, these bombs, they do hit pretty dang hard, no matter what you're hitting at. Then you move on, yeah, where that was just the first line here. Those 4 bastards are just in this 4 line here. I always hate shooting at these things because you never know when you're going to be taking damage from their gunners. Also, he's just bobbing and weaving in between your shots, so that's why those things are pretty messed up. You get the AR-2, which I've flown out a little bit. I have a few things unlocked here. So the first thing you're going to notice, especially when you're looking at the nose, is unfortunately you don't have that beautiful dual-mounted turret anymore. You just have this one little gun here. But in bombers, the front gunner isn't really going to shoot at all that much unless you're chasing other bombers, which, by the way, the SB2Ms, if you ever get a chance to, just troll other bombers with them. You're fast enough to keep up with them, and your forward-facing armament is about the same as much as the biplanes in the game, but at Battle Ranking 2.7 here, you're going to have to say goodbye to a lot of your biplane battles and start facing off against a lot more powerful monoplanes. But the big thing with the AR-2 is that this thing can dive bomb. The bombing reticle on it basically doesn't move. You can do horizontal bombing, you can do dive bombing. I guess that's why it's at a 2.7 battle ranking, is because it has that flexibility of being able to be a ground attacking dive bomber or a traditional level bomber. And, you know, because it's a modification of the SB2Ms, the armor plating's the same, the fuel tank and loadout, everything's basically the same, the gunner loadout, basically the same. I mean, that's a little suggestive right there, but other than, no, this isn't Ivan, this is Vlad. Vlad up here losing that second gun, it's basically the same. Just, this thing can dive bomb. I guess that gives it a 2.7 battle ranking. But bombs, kind of the same thing. You lose the ability of carrying the 250s and the 500s together, but just strap on the 3 500s. You get 1,500 kilograms of bombs in just that loadout anyway, which can kill 3 heavy pillboxes or can damage a base pretty darn badly. Which, if you're playing in arcade, you can just reload your bombs anyway. Or if you're playing realistic battle, 3 pillboxes and then heading back to base seems like a pretty successful run. Then moving on to the Yak-4, which is a modification of the Yak-2, obviously. You can see how similar they look. But this one decided not to have as much fun as a heavy fighter and became more of a proper bomber. I wouldn't say this more as a bomber as much as it is like a ground attacker. As you can see, I haven't flown it out all that much, but this is what it comes stock to you. You do get the bombs right off the bat, so fortunately you have some ordnance as soon as you get it. But as you could tell, with the Yak-2, it's the same sort of armor plating, although you do have some stuff right here in the front, but I don't know why you'd go head-on with this thing. You only have the one little gun here, which, I mean, can kill something. I mean, it is a Shikos machine gun, so I guess it can kill something, but you kind of lose out on all the fun on being a heavy fighter / attacker, and you just basically just become an attacker. And Ivan back here, it's only the one gunner. He doesn't have that great of a firing arc. It's about from like there to there. You have nothing underneath, so you're going to have to, in my opinion, you don't fly this thing as a bomber. I don't know why it's in the bomber line. I guess because it has more bombs than guns, so it's technically a bomber instead of an attacker. But, you know, same problems as the Yak-2. Fuel tanks everywhere, except now you're not going to have as much fun destroying yourself in a hail of bullets because you've only got the one little gun and you've got bombs. That's okay, you've got bombs. This thing isn't that great, in my opinion. Okay, so moving on to premium aircraft. You get I think this is Sikorsky's. I'm trying to remember how that's pronounced. Mind the awful paint scheme I've given it. Yours will come just all white. If this is the gift aircraft for the Russians, so if Russia is your first nation in air battles that you get a win in, this is an exact copy of this guy right here, the M62. It's just Zherkovsky's plane. I'm not too sure of the historical significance of him. I'm pretty sure if you want to, I'm not doing this series based off historical value. I'm just going off just to the performances in game. But you do get this nice cool winter camouflage here, which I've decorated a little bit, and now it looks obscene, but that's just me. There we go. You also get the Hampton TB Mark I. Now, this is going to be the first, I think it's the first, in this series I've covered of Lend-Lease / captured aircraft. Now, when I say captured aircraft or Lend-Lease aircraft, you notice how this has a little star by its name? That's because this isn't a Russian plane. This is a British bomber. In fact, there it is right there. This is the exact same plane as the plane you get as the Russians. So, obviously I'll cover this plane more in detail once I get to the British rank 1. But I'm just going to describe how this plane really utilizes itself. I don't have this one, obviously, because I've flown out the other Hamptons in the British tech tree, but I feel like flying those has given me the ability to kind of figure out how this plane works, and this plane is actually fairly decent. You get a lot of options in terms of your ordnance. You can have torpedoes, you can have 4,000-pound bombs, and then 2 500s. You can do some serious damage in this little thing. The only real major difference that I've seen is that they replaced this top turret with a Berezin 50 cal machine gun, the same that's on the Lags, and it does have this little ball turret here, so it does have a decent cone of fire. But in terms of your other defensive armament, you do have a dual mounted turret here, but it does have a fairly limited cone of fire. I would say about a little bit further than this tail length here is his cone of fire. So you want to make sure your enemies are directly behind you or close to as possible so you can get shots on it with this dual turret here. And then in the front, you have this guy here who basically just points his gun straight down, so it's kind of useless because most people at this battle ranking that are attacking you are going to be attacking you from the behind you and below you. So I guess this guy basically doesn't shoot at much, is what I'm trying to say. You actually do have a bit of forward-facing armament. You've got this 7.7 Browning machine gun. Now, because this is a Lend-Lease aircraft, this gun, and these two down here are going to be British guns. So they're not going to be firing as fast or as powerful as the 50 cal Russian back here. But this guy is okay. This guy sucks. This guy, I feel like, is only... I don't know why this is here. This is more of a traditional bomber, where you just fly up at high altitudes and just drop your ordnance. You basically have nothing to do with the ground other than the bombing target in the first place. So I don't know why this thing's here. I really don't. I guess maybe if you do want to go hunting after ground targets, you could take out, like, a target with it. because the British guns aren't that great. But I'll explain that more in my British video, so we're going to move on. And then you also get the PBY-5A Catalina. Now, in my American video, where I talk the praise about the Catalinas, everything of that applies to here. This is the exact same aircraft. Nothing has changed about it, except now it has a big fat red star on the side. Other than that, it has the landing gear, so it's the, like I said, it's the 5A model. Just as durable, just as fun to fly, has the same everything. It's the exact same plane. So, I guess if you really, really like Catalinas and you want a Russian one, then go right ahead. The only real thing is I think... Nope, they're the same bombs. I was looking for kilograms instead of... No, those are American bombs. Yeah, this is an American plane that just happens to have a big red star on it. So anyway... Tier 1 Russia. What do I have to say? Well, these overpowered little pieces of crap are... It's going to be a game few and far between where you see hardly any Russians. If you get into a biplane match and you don't see any of these, buy a lotto ticket. If you get into a 2.0 to 2.3 and you don't see one of these, buy a lotto ticket. Because Russia's a pretty popular country in terms of this game. It's because their fighters deliver at destroying other fighters. Their ground attackers are great at taking out ground targets. Their bombers are trolly as heck. So, what's not to love? Anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.